The cicadas screamed outside the windows of the small two-story home in East Nashville, their high-pitched chorus filling the thick Tennessee night air. Jacob Harper lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it lazily spun above him. Beside him, his wife, Emily, shifted in her sleep, or at least pretended to. He had been married long enough to know the difference between genuine slumber and the kind of restless movements meant to imitate it. Something was wrong. It had been wrong for weeks now, maybe months. Emily wasn't the same. She used to curl against him at night, laugh at his terrible dad jokes, send him random texts during her lunch breaks from Vanderbilt Hospital where she worked as a nurse. But lately, she'd been elsewhere. Distant. Guarded. Her phone was never left unattended anymore. Conversations ended abruptly when he walked into the room. And tonight, as the glow of her screen reflected briefly on the wall before she quickly turned it face down, Jacob's stomach twisted. She was hiding something. Jacob was 36, a history teacher at a public high school just outside of Nashville. He wasn't glamorous, not wealthy, but he was steady, the kind of man who remembered anniversaries, who changed the oil himself, who never forgot to pick up flowers for Emily, just because. Emily was 34, beautiful in a way that seemed effortless. Auburn hair, pale green eyes, a smile that could light up a room. They had been married for 9 years, together for 12. They'd weathered tough times, his father's death, her long shifts during the pandemic, the struggles of paying off student loans, but Jacob believed they were stronger for it. Or at least he had. Their neighborhood in East Nashville was the kind of place young families dreamed of, tree-lined streets, porches with rocking chairs, the faint sound of live music drifting from nearby bars on warm nights. To their friends, Jacob and Emily were the perfect couple. But Jacob had started to notice cracks. Late nights. Excuses. The faintest whiff of cologne on her scrubs when she came home. He told himself he was being paranoid. But doubt had a way of growing like mold in the corners of his mind. That it was a Saturday morning in September when Jacob first confronted the thought head-on. Emily was in the kitchen, scrolling her phone while sipping coffee. "Who's keeping you so entertained?" Jacob asked lightly, pouring himself a cup. She flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but enough. "Just work stuff. Brittany's on the night shift, complaining again." Jacob nodded, forcing a smile. "Must be some rant. You've been glued to that screen all week." Emily gave a thin laugh, brushing her hair back. "You're imagining things, Jake." But he wasn't. He knew her tells. The way her voice went slightly higher when she lied. The way she tucked her phone into her pocket screen down. That afternoon, while Emily showered, Jacob picked up her phone from the nightstand. Locked. A passcode he didn't know. They had always shared everything, passwords, accounts, calendars. But suddenly, her phone was off limits. That was the moment the first real stone of suspicion lodged in his chest. Days turned into weeks. Jacob watched Emily more closely, cataloging her inconsistencies like evidence in one of the true crime podcasts she loved. She started working late more often. She changed her hairstyle, bought new makeup. She lingered in the mirror longer before leaving the house. One evening, while grading essays at the kitchen table, Jacob heard her laughing softly in the living room. He peeked in to see her on the phone, cheeks flushed, twirling a strand of hair. "Who was that?" he asked when she noticed him. She hesitated too long. "Brittany again. You know how she is." But Brittany's laugh wasn't deep and male, and Jacob knew it. The seed of betrayal had sprouted. Jacob became someone he didn't recognize, paranoid, desperate, quietly obsessive. He began noticing every detail, the way she dressed, her sudden interest in going to the gym, the way she hummed walking out the door but returned silent and distracted. One night, after she fell asleep, he snuck into her purse and found a crumpled receipt, a bar tab for 2 cocktails at a downtown lounge. A place they had never gone together. His heart sank. Another time, he checked the mileage on her car before she left for a shift. When she came home, the numbers didn't add up. And then came the scent, the unmistakable, musky cologne that clung faintly to her blouse when she kissed him goodnight. Jacob wasn't crazy. He was being betrayed. One Thursday evening, Jacob couldn't take it anymore. "Emily," he said, voice tight as they sat at the dinner table, half-eaten pasta cooling between them. "Are you seeing someone else?" Her fork froze midair. She blinked, caught off guard, but not shocked. That was what broke him most. She set the fork down. "Jake. Don't Jake me. Just tell me the truth." Her eyes welled up, but her lips stayed pressed shut. That silence told him everything. "You are," he whispered. Emily's shoulders sagged. "It's not what you think." Jacob slammed his hand against the table, rattling the plates. "Then what is it?" She looked away. "I don't want to hurt you." The words hit harder than a confession. Because they confirmed it all, his name was Mark Daniels. Jacob discovered it 2 days later when Emily left her laptop open. A string of emails, hidden in a folder, revealed everything. Mark was a doctor at the hospital, recently divorced, mid-40s, charming and ambitious. Their messages were full of longing, inside jokes, promises of a future. Jacob scrolled through them in a daze, bile rising in his throat. Phrases like, "I can't wait to see you tonight," and, "You make me feel alive again." Alive again. What had he been to her, then? Just stability? Just routine? Jacob's world began to collapse. He went through the motions at school, teaching Civil War battles and Reconstruction policies, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Every time Emily smiled, he wondered if she was thinking of Mark. He started drinking at night, whiskey dulling the edges of his fury. His friends noticed he was withdrawn. His mother called, worried about the tone in his voice. And yet Emily carried on, still sneaking around, still pretending. The duplicity was unbearable. Jacob didn't want to just leave. He wanted her to feel what he felt, betrayed, broken, stripped of everything she thought was secure. He started planning. Quietly, methodically. First, he gathered proof, printing the emails, photographing her car parked outside Mark's apartment. Then, he consulted a lawyer, who told him Tennessee courts still considered adultery grounds for divorce, often swaying property settlements. Jacob tucked that information away like a weapon. Next, he called Mark's ex-wife, who was more than eager to share stories of Mark's past affairs, his temper, his manipulations. Jacob listened, filing away every detail. And then, he waited. It happened on a Sunday evening. Emily came home late, hair tousled, smelling faintly of Mark's cologne. Jacob was waiting in the living room, a folder on the coffee table. "Sit," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Emily froze. "What's going on?" He slid the folder toward her. Inside, printed emails, photos, receipts. Her face drained of color. "Jake. Don't. I know everything." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I love you, Stop lying." His shout made her flinch. "You loved him. You threw away our marriage for some cheap fling with a doctor who will toss you aside like everyone else." She sobbed, reaching for him. "Please, I can fix this." But Jacob stood, shaking with rage and sorrow. "No. You don't fix betrayal. You burn it to the ground." The divorce was swift and brutal. Jacob's lawyer used every scrap of evidence. Emily lost the house, half her savings, and her reputation at work once whispers spread about her affair with Mark. Mark, true to form, began distancing himself within weeks. By the time the divorce papers were finalized, he had already moved on to another nurse. Emily was left hollow, alone, living in a cramped apartment downtown. Jacob walked away scorched but standing. Heartbroken, yes. But alive. Some nights, he still lay awake, cicadas screaming outside, wondering if love was ever real or just another story we tell ourselves to feel safe. But at least now, the lies were gone. And the truth, as painful as it was, had set him free. The house was silent. Too silent. Jacob Harper sat on the edge of the bed in the East Nashville home that once rang with laughter, soft arguments, the sound of Emily's footsteps on hardwood floors. Now it was just him, the creak of the old ceiling fan, and the weight of a silence that seemed alive. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. The papers sat folded on his desk in the study, signed and sealed like the final chapter of a novel he never wanted to write. Emily was gone. The photos had been taken down. Her clothes, her books, her perfume bottles, all gone. But the memories refused to leave. Sometimes, late at night, Jacob swore he could still hear her laughter drifting down the hallway. Sometimes he caught himself reaching for his phone to text her before remembering there was no us anymore. Just him. The loneliness was brutal. He thought freedom would feel cleaner, sharper, a kind of catharsis. Instead, it felt like standing in a burned-out house, the smoke cleared but the charred walls still standing. He went through the motions. He taught his classes, graded his students' essays, nodded politely in the teacher's lounge when colleagues asked how he was holding up. Everyone knew about the divorce. It was impossible to keep something like that quiet in a town like Nashville. But no one knew the full story. No one knew the betrayal. He didn't tell them. He couldn't. At night, the whiskey bottle became his closest companion. One glass to dull the ache. Then another. Then one more. He told himself it was temporary, just until things steadied. But deep down, Jacob knew he was slipping. One evening, after a particularly long day at school, he returned home, dropped his bag by the door, and sat in the darkened living room. His eyes wandered to the coffee table, to the faint rings left behind by wine glasses Emily used to set there. He remembered the nights they had sat together, watching old movies, her feet tucked under his leg. And then the image shattered, replaced by her with Mark, their whispered laughter, their stolen nights. The rage bubbled up again, hot and bitter. He slammed his fist against the table, startling even himself. "Damn you, Emily," he whispered. "Damn you both." But after the rage, there was nothing left but hollow emptiness. He leaned back, covering his face with his hands. He had survived the fire, yes. But now he was standing in the ashes, unsure if he could ever rebuild. Emily Harper, no, Emily Daniels, as she had quietly begun signing her name in private, sat in her cramped one-bedroom apartment downtown. The place smelled faintly of mildew, a far cry from the bright, airy home she had once shared with Jacob. The divorce had taken more than her marriage. It had taken her sense of identity, her pride, her stability. She had fought for the house, but Jacob's lawyer had been ruthless. The evidence of her affair left her with little ground to stand on. The judge hadn't looked at her with pity, only disappointment. Now she paid too much for rent in a building where the neighbors fought through the walls and the water pressure never worked right. At Vanderbilt Hospital, whispers followed her down the halls. She could feel them, her co-workers, other nurses, even the residents, turning their heads, lowering their voices. Nashville wasn't as big as people liked to think. Word traveled fast. Especially when you had been caught sleeping with a doctor. Mark Daniels had been her escape. Her thrill. Her promise of something more. But now, he was fading. At first, he was attentive, whisking her away to dinners, slipping his hand into hers in hospital corridors. But now his texts came less often. His smile was distracted. His excuses piled up the way hers once had with Jacob. "You knew he was a cheater," her best friend Miranda had said over the phone. "Why would you think you'd be different?" Emily had no answer. She had believed in the fantasy. Believed she deserved more than a husband who brought home flowers and stability. She wanted fire. And she had burned down her life to get it. On a cold October evening, she sat across from Mark in a trendy restaurant in the Gulch. He barely looked at her, scrolling his phone between bites. "So," she said, forcing a smile, "are we still on for the weekend? I thought maybe we could drive out to Asheville, get away for a bit." Mark didn't look up. "Can't. Busy." "Busy with what?" she pressed. He finally met her eyes, but his expression was flat. "Work. Life. Don't make this complicated, Em." Her throat tightened. "Complicated? We've been," she lowered her voice. "We've been together for almost a year." Mark sighed, tossing his napkin on the table. "Look, we had fun, okay? But you're divorced now. Things change." The words landed like a knife. "You're leaving me." "I'm not leaving. I'm just moving on." He stood, dropping cash on the table. "Take care of yourself." And just like that, he walked away. Emily sat frozen, her face burning as other diners tried not to stare. She felt the walls closing in, her heart hammering in her chest. She had given up everything, her marriage, her home, her reputation, for a man who had discarded her like an old coat. When she returned to her apartment that night, she collapsed on the bed and wept until dawn. For the first time, Emily realized she wasn't just ruined. She was alone. Jacob Harper hadn't been on a date in nearly 12 years. The thought of starting over felt strange, almost absurd. He was 36, divorced, worn down by betrayal. Love wasn't something he craved anymore, it was something he mistrusted, like a hand that once fed him but later struck him. But life has a way of nudging you forward, even when you resist. It happened at a bookstore on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Jacob had ducked into Parnassus Books, a cozy Nashville staple, to escape the drizzle. He found himself wandering the aisles aimlessly, thumbing through titles he didn't really plan to buy. That's when he heard her voice. "Excuse me, sorry, could you hand me that copy?" Jacob turned. She was standing on the other side of the shelf, pointing to a thick hardcover on the top row. Her smile was warm, disarming. She had curly dark hair pulled back into a loose bun, glasses slipping down her nose, and a kind of presence that felt grounded. He reached up, pulled the book free, and handed it over. The collected letters of Flannery O'Connor. "Didn't peg you as a Southern Gothic type," he said, surprising himself with the ease in his voice. She laughed, a genuine, musical sound. "I'm an English professor. Comes with the job." She extended her hand. "Colleen." "Jacob," he replied, shaking it. They talked for 20 minutes, the conversation flowing effortlessly. She was witty, sharp, unpretentious. When she spoke, she looked him directly in the eyes, something Emily had stopped doing long before the end. By the time Jacob left the bookstore, his phone buzzed with a new contact saved, Colleen Brooks. Their first date was coffee. Neutral territory, no pressure. Jacob expected awkward silences, but instead he found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. Colleen had stories about her students, about literature, about her disastrous attempt to learn the fiddle when she first moved to Tennessee. Over the next few weeks, they met again and again, walks through Centennial Park, dinners at local diners, even a night at the Ryman Auditorium where she insisted he needed to experience live bluegrass. Jacob felt the faintest flicker of something he thought had died inside him. Hope. And yet, beneath it all, there was fear. Every time Colleen's phone buzzed, Jacob's stomach tightened. Every time she smiled at a text, he felt the phantom sting of betrayal. He tried to bury it, but trust, once broken, was a fragile thing. One night, after she kissed him goodbye outside his house, Jacob stood on the porch long after she drove away. The cicadas buzzed in the dark, the same sound that had haunted his sleepless nights. But this time, it felt different. For the first time since the divorce, Jacob wondered if maybe, just maybe, his life wasn't over. Maybe it was only beginning again. Jacob's life with Colleen was fragile, tentative, but real. For months, he felt something close to peace. Until one night, in early December, when a knock came at his door. Emily. Her eyes were hollow, her body thinner, her once effortless glow dimmed. She clutched a coat around her shoulders like armor. "Jake," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Mark Daniels had been exposed. A malpractice scandal, whispered accusations of harassment, and eventually suspension from the hospital. Emily told Jacob everything, how Mark had cut her off, how she had been left with nothing. "I made a mistake," she said, crying at his kitchen table. "I threw us away for him. And now I have no one." Jacob stared at her, emotions warring. Part of him wanted to slam the door in her face. But another part, the part that still remembered loving her, hesitated. Colleen noticed the change immediately. Jacob grew distracted, restless. When she asked, he finally confessed, Emily had come back. Colleen's expression hardened. "You can't heal if you keep letting her back into your life." But Jacob wasn't sure. Was helping Emily weakness, or closure? One night, Jacob met Emily at a quiet diner. Their conversation started civil, but soon turned bitter. "You ruined me, Jake," Emily said, eyes flashing. "Do you think you're the only one who lost something?" Jacob's voice rose, raw. "I lost my marriage. My trust. My entire life. And you want me to feel sorry for you?" Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks, but she didn't deny it. Emily began calling often, sometimes drunk, sometimes desperate. At first Jacob ignored her, but she had a way of pulling him back in, stirring guilt he didn't want to feel. Colleen grew weary. One night she told him, "If you can't cut her out, you'll lose me." Jacob realized he stood at a breaking point. That it happened in January. Emily showed up unannounced, pounding on his door in the middle of the night. Colleen was inside. "Let me in," Emily shouted, her voice ragged. "I need you, Jake." Colleen stood behind him, her face pale. "This is it. Choose." Jacob opened the door just enough to look Emily in the eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, "you chose someone else long ago. And now, so do I." He shut the door. Emily's sobs echoed in the darkness as Jacob leaned against the wood, shaking, tears stinging his eyes. Spring came. The cicadas were quieter now, replaced by the hum of a new season. Jacob still carried scars, but he was no longer drowning in them. Colleen stayed. Not because she saved him, but because she stood beside him while he saved himself. Emily disappeared from his life. Rumors said she left Nashville, chasing work in another state. Perhaps she was still searching for something she could never hold on to. One warm evening, Jacob sat on his porch with Colleen, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. For the first time, he felt the silence of the house wasn't empty, it was peaceful. The past was ashes. But from ashes, new life could grow. And Jacob was ready to live again.